Okay, there we go. Now I see it on YouTube. All right, why don't we get started? Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the BlockSpaces live show. My name is Shahan Khoshafian. I'll be the host again for today. And then for those of you who haven't joined before, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you can check back in. We do a live show every Thursday on a different topic. So let's get started. Let's get to know our amazing guests today. And so, Setrag, why don't you start with you? I know it's a very recognizable last name. We have the same last names. You're also my dad. Why don't we start with you? What's your background? What led you to this point of your career? And then Chuck, we could start with you after that.
All right, great to be here, Shahan. What a privilege. Yeah, my name is Cedric Khoshafian. I've been in the software industry for about 30 years. I've focused both on intelligent, intelligent database technology, as well as intelligent business process management. Very recently, I've been focusing on both startup and organizational culture. Culture in terms of alleviating silos, inter and intra-organizational silos. I've been focusing on automation, different aspects of automation, and then also balancing innovation with best practices. So that's a very high level. I see technologies such as AI, blockchain, IoT, and automation as enablers for this cultural transformation that is happening, and it's very, very exciting. So recently, I've joined Khosh Consulting as principal and chief scientist, and we're focusing on accelerating innovation as well as entrepreneurship, both for startups and established incumbent enterprises.
That's great. Thank you for that background. And Chuck, can we get a brief background from you as well?
Sure, absolutely. Chuck Dyer. I am the Director of Product Development for DXC Technology in Tampa. My background started back in my military career working with networking technologies, satellite telecommunications, and it kind of morphed into what I did in the private sector whenever I got off of active duty. I've worked for technology companies primarily my entire career for almost 30 years now. Really focused early on in the 90s with virtualization and getting into the early aspects of software as a service. Over the last 10, 15 years, I've been doing large data center architectures and migrations and architectures around cloud technologies. And probably over the past 8 years, been really deep diving into AI, machine learning, blockchain. So that's kind of where my passion is.
That's great. Yeah, I think you'll both give some great perspectives during this discussion. So, Setrag, why don't we start with you? It's weird to say your first name, but you've been emphasizing this concept of a value chain over a blockchain. Can you explain what you mean by value chain? Some may have not heard that term before, and what is its value proposition?
Absolutely. I'm a visual person, Shahan. If you don't mind, I want to share my screen if I can do that.
Yep. And let me know if you have an
I'm
issue.
going to explain it because it's extremely important and critical. So I assume you can see it.
Yes.
All right. So let me put it in view mode. It's better. So sorry. It's just
you see the plus and minus at the bottom. You can actually press.
I see. I'm trying. Okay. Let me. Yes. Okay. This is not what I want. Wow. Okay. All right. Okay. It's just not staying.
We could see it on here if needed.
Okay. So let me do it. Yeah. Let me not spend too much time. So if you look at this illustration, I'm going to go right to the value chain where you have a number of industries that are illustrated. One of them, for example, this one is supply chain. This is smart cities. This is in healthcare and then manufacturing. A value chain has a beginning and an end, and it orchestrates various participants, humans, enterprises, robots, uh, enterprise applications. It orchestrates for a specific value. And that specific value could be return on investment, compliance, it could be cutting costs, and you're getting an ROI in the context of a value chain. So imagine supply chain, for example. There is an order, there is a lot of orchestration from the manufacturing, transportation, warehousing, and then providing it to those companies or individuals who are trying to procure. So you have a pipeline, that value chain of the supply chain, and you have several challenges in this value chain. It could be things get lost, the quality of the supply. It could deal with the payments. You're going cross-organizational, sometimes cross-country boundaries. What you're trying to achieve are specific objectives, specific values. In fact, it's interesting. Blockchain has often been called the Internet of Value. So you have the Internet of Information, Internet of Things, and then you have Internet of Value. Well, where is the value? Blockchain is an enabler technology that in different aspects of this value chain, for example, registering the supplier provisioning, know your supplier. Well, that identity management could be done on the blockchain. Or there could be another aspect, the transportation. You're taking from the warehouse to your distributors to the end procurer of what you're trying to supply or procure. Well, all of that can leverage blockchain technology as well as Internet of Things. But the interesting thing is that you're focusing on the return of investment in terms of speed, quality, expenses, etc., of the value chain. And you are leveraging then different types of technologies, one of them being blockchain, and potentially in terms of supply chain, multiple blockchains. So that transition from a bottom-up technology enabler, which is very important. I mean, Chuck mentioned the cloud, and there are a lot of XaaS technology. You have database technology, you have blockchain technology, you have IoTs, you have enterprise. Those are all enablers. That's a bottom-up approach. In value chain, you're taking a top-down approach. You say, what am I trying to achieve? Who are my participants? I have a beginning and end. I have a state transition. I'm going through various milestones, etc. And that's what you're focusing on. And each one of these examples I have here, from manufacturing, healthcare, smart cities, etc., they have value chains. They are an aggregation of value chains, and that's what we need to focus on if we want to really achieve the promise of Internet of Value for blockchains as well as IoT.
And just piggybacking on what you just said, you mentioned blockchain, you mentioned AI, you mentioned IoT. These are some of the hottest technologies. How are they all related? You mentioned a bit like how they might converge for the value chain, but can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, in fact, let me share this a little bit. We are generating enormous amount of data. I mean, the numbers boggle the mind, and we are doubling the amount of data that we're generating, every 6 months, and that time it takes us to double the amount of data we're generating is being reduced. And so we're constantly generating data from blockchain, from IoT. I haven't even put here transactional data and social data, tweets and Facebook, etc. Now, this data is being organized in various, databases. And then when AI comes, so the IoT and blockchain, in one sense, are very much the sources of these data, as well as social data, transactional data. And AI can come and say, okay, what patterns can we detect like predictive patterns? Can we detect in terms of for example, I gave the supply chain example of the behavior of suppliers, of transportation, etc. And then from that, once you detect the pattern, you go to this orchestration on the action part. So how are they related? Well, you want to execute the value chain, and now you're leveraging intelligence that can come also, by the way, from the heads of people. That can come from the data, from the patterns you detected. It could be deep learning patterns. It could be predictive models. There's a whole spectrum of AI algorithms there, as well as various business rules and policies that come from the heads of people. You're going to the action part. So you're generating data from IoT and blockchain and coming to the action. But now the action part can leverage the various models, AI models, to be more intelligent, to provide, for example, intelligent assistance, to decide what to automate at particular parts in the value chain. So you are generating patterns and detecting, and you're then coming to the action part and leveraging those AI models to achieve your value. That is, reduce cost, increase revenue, be more compliant, increase quality, etc. So you're leveraging that intelligence, often hand in hand with human intelligence, for your blockchain applications, which are in terms of value chains, beginning, and you're leveraging the intelligence. So you're detecting intelligence, and then you're leveraging in the action part of the intelligence, and then you're generating more data. So there is sort of this continuous learning loop that AI is leveraged throughout this loop, whether you're doing initial detection or going to the action part.
Right. And we're talking a lot about like technologies, blockchain, AI, IoT, but you mentioned with value chain, and I often, like when I'm in this industry, I see people talk about how fast different blockchain platforms might be, but they're not talking about the business value. They're not talking about getting your food to your grocery store 50% faster or whatnot. So it's not focused on the business value. So we're talking about the technology trends, but let's talk about business models and business value. What are best practices, and then what are companies like small and large looking for in these areas?
Excellent. So if you look at business value and business models, there are actually three areas that the value is achieved. One is, how fast can I build innovative applications that meet the needs of my customers or target accounts? I mean, if you look at software, all the tools that we're building in software, it's one way or another trying to address it. How fast can we do? How convenient? What are the libraries? So in fact, one paradigm is low code, no code, where the programming itself has progressed, and now you're having regular people. They're called citizen developers. And in terms of AI, by the way, they're called citizen data scientists, are able to innovate. So that business model you're talking about, Shahan, it's really how fast can I accelerate the innovation. That's one area. The other area is what is called, and often actually this is ignored when we have so many shiny objects and technologies. It's called operational excellence. How much waste do I have? And I can give you so many examples in terms of business models, everything from dealing with disputes, tracing, for example, in supply chain. There are other prescriptive maintenance. You have in healthcare, the connectivity between the patient, the provider, and payer. There are all kinds of waste, replication of data, manual handoffs, inconsistencies that happen. So the business model should address this operational excellence and saying, how can we reduce and eliminate waste? So in the first example, it's how fast can we build and accelerate innovation? And then once you build your solution, what is your operational excellence? How much you can automate so that you reduce waste? And the other area is continuously monitor and improve. Nothing is done. You always have opportunities as you are delving deeper. This is where intelligent business, I prefer to call it intelligent business rather than business intelligence, which often looks at the rear view mirror. So you have intelligence in the business saying, oh, where are my bottlenecks? Who are the suppliers that are causing, certain problems for me? How can I predict and have better, less reduced risk in whatever I am doing, whether in manufacturing, healthcare, etc. So this monitoring and continuously improvement goes hand in hand with building innovative applications, and then operational excellence, and then continuous improvement.
Awesome. And I just had one more final question for you to kind of close this out, and then I had some questions for Chuck as well.
Great.
But what can blockchain platforms and technologies learn from AI and IoT platforms and technologies? Because I know that, like in IoT as an example, when I was working with many of the high tech manufacturing companies, they oftentimes had different standards. And they had different best practices that they rolled out, maybe different languages that they're using, and everybody's doing something different, and it's just like causing a whole set of other problems for the industry. So from your perspective, what can blockchain learn from AI and IoT platforms?
That is, and each AI and IoT have had their own history. AI, as goes back to the 70s. I've been involved in several AI initiatives. And it had its hype. We had expert system, and it went down, and now it's making a comeback for a number of reasons. One of them is the speed of computation we've had. Moore's law has been helping AI a lot. The algorithm, the maturities of the algorithms, and the data we're generating. Although AI is not just data, you also have intelligence in the heads of people. So what we can learn? Well, one thing we can learn is that there will be phases, there will be ups and downs, there will be unrealistic. I can tell you a story. I mean, I know one AI presentation, the presenter were saying, my AI is so great, I let it run, came back in the morning, and it had discovered number theory. Well, that's not true. There are these exaggerations of what AI could do, the hype, and Gartner has this hype cycle. So that's one thing we can learn, is not to get too much hyped, and be very, very pragmatic. From what we can learn from IoT, I always like to give this reference model. This is from IoT World Forum reference model. There are a number of reference architectures. What happened in IoT, there are today more than 600 IoT platform companies, and they focus on the lower level. So you have the physical devices, connectors, you have different connectivity technologies, you have edge computing. I've added blockchain here. This is not from them, this is from me. And then you go higher and higher up, and you can see that the level 7 there, this is the ISO OSI type of reference architecture, is collaboration involving people, processes, value chains, etc. So what can we learn from it? Well, a lot of the IoT, and there is, by the way, not only Internet of Things, there's industrial Internet of Things and consumer Internet of Things. The focus have been bottom up, like fascination with technology. And I'm seeing that in blockchain as well. The various algorithms, consensus algorithms, SHA-256, all these. I mean, when you hear about any presentation value proposition, there is a higher level description, and immediately it's about the technology, lower level technology. And IoT has had its own struggle in becoming like more popular, both on the consumer as well as industrial. We're still in the beginning. We're starting to take off. But that focus on the lower level versus the higher level, starting top down with the value chain, the collaboration. This is not from me, it's from them. Collaboration and processes. When you have that focus in blockchain, it will be very, very beneficial. That's why I introduced this notion of value chain, dovetailing on Internet of Value and the chain aspect of blockchain. So that is a major lesson. And today, as I said, there are more than 600 IoT platform vendors. They're not going to survive. And those who are going to survive are the ones who are focusing on the collaboration and the processes, the value chain, leveraging the various IoT technologies that I've described here.
Great. Thank you. I think that's really key. And I know that, Chuck, you've had a ton of experience with these different technologies too. From your perspective, I'd love to get your thoughts as well. While you think that this, convergence between blockchain and AI may be new, do you have any examples of like people who have implemented these technologies, and what were the results from your perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question, Shahan, and I love the detail that that was gone into on some of the supply chain aspects. So it's always good to have a real world example to kind of help that all make sense. So I guess one that I would throw out in the supply chain space would be Maersk, which is probably one of the largest shipping and logistics companies in the world. They're based out of Copenhagen, Denmark. They manage about 150 ports around the world and probably 2 to 3 million containers. And that encompasses about $4 trillion of business around the world. So as you can imagine, that's extremely difficult to manage. If you look at just one ship traveling from one port to another port, there's approximately 200 plus interactions that take place during that travel. And they have to coordinate with potentially 30 different companies around the world, let alone the creation of probably 4 inches of paperwork through all of that. So what did they do? They implemented blockchain to manage those 200 plus interactions. And that brought transparency and communication of data to all those companies around the world. Now, what did that do? That increased the number of ships that they can now manage by 15%. And they've reduced overall cost by 10 to 15%. So those are realized numbers that they actually got those efficiencies out of that. Now, on top of that, by adding in machine learning, deep learning, AI modeling, you can start building alerts and notifications and access to predictive analytics that really become game changers in that type of an implementation. So this function not only improved efficiencies, it actually brought extraordinary visibility into the cost of each transaction in the process. And so from the example of like if you want to ship copper from Shanghai to Chile in January, maybe you want to know what the average shipping prices are and the insurance costs are for that commodity in that month of the year. So that AI being able to look at all of that data they really now have a lot more granular, detailed information, allowing them and their customers to make more informed decisions.
And you touched on this briefly, but how can we merge all of this, the tech that we're talking about, to do something useful with it? I know we love it as technologists, right? It's really cool tech, really cool things, blockchain, AI, cryptocurrencies, IoT, so many cool things that you can do with it. But how are we doing something useful, or to Setrag's point earlier, being part of this value chain?
Well, there's certainly a lot of things going on right now where it's converging those technologies together. One of the things that's really interesting, if you've done any history looking between web version 1.0, web 2.0, and now this whole concept of web 3.0, and that's kind of the convergence of some of these together. So let's start with blockchain. So the advent of blockchain and its data structure allowed us to not have to trust third parties to store our transactions. That was the whole promise Satoshi had with Bitcoin, by not requiring a bank to be able to send and record financial transactions. So what else can blockchain store for us? We don't need to trust a third party to store our transactions. We don't need a third party to store our data. And we don't need a third party to store our code either, meaning web apps. So what if you could store code in blockchain? Well, that's what Ethereum did. They took Bitcoin's blockchain, they added logs, difficulty, timestamps, and the ability to run code within the blockchain in a secure, transparent, and distributed model. So from that, now all you need is to be able to get data through an API out from Web 2.0, from data that is changing all the time. So if you put a app in a blockchain, it's going to be what it is. It can't be hacked, it can't be changed, but it has to be able to get data that changes on a regular basis. So that's where oracles come in, and those are basically networks of trusted third-party sources that have consensus on trusted data. So that allows a distributed application running in a blockchain to be able to pull from trusted sources to get dynamic data that needs to be able to operate that applications. So how do we then get large amounts of data into these applications? Well, you would use a distributed file system like IPFS or interplanetary file system. This will allow for the storage of large amounts of data across millions of nodes that's available to your distributed applications. So now you have, with the convergence of these, full stack distributed decentralized applications. So now if you layer on AI and specifically deep learning, you have inputs, you apply summation and function, and you have output data. The problem is today's AIs live on servers or on your phone or on computers or on IoT devices. What if you could kind of free them to work in a decentralized way and give them the ability to talk to each other and learn from each other? And I think what it really comes down to is kind of that debate as to whether it's better to allow intelligence to emerge on its own or whether it should be coded in. So that's kind of some of the exciting things that you can do with the convergence of those technologies together.
And if a company was to look to explore to bring these technologies together, you know, how should they think about it? How should they go about it? What should they do in this area? Because it's clearly going to be part of the future. It's getting better and better. The value propositions are becoming clearer. So how should different companies get involved, and what should they be doing today to prepare for the future?
Well, I believe certainly it's really important for companies to stay ahead of technology. You know, technologies like blockchain, machine learning, artificial intelligence, and cloud have now really been tested and validated by the market. You know, if you think about cloud for a minute, you know, just 10 years ago, companies were trying to determine whether it was smart for them to move out of their own data centers and trust somebody else with their systems and data. Right. You know, today, cloud adoption in the enterprise is almost a necessity. Look at the impact that the pandemic's had on companies that were still running in their own data centers. Their ability to adapt and scale resources for remote workers was extremely painful. And those who had already adopted cloud and migrated to cloud barely noticed any change. They were able to adapt to that very quickly. You know, blockchain and AI are individually are very powerful tools, but when you can bring great, but they, you know, together, they can bring great value to an organization. And I feel it's going to kind of be that next revolution of bringing those together and converging those together to really look at the data and be able to bring a lot more value to companies with the data that they already have.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to wrap this up, I just want to know if there's any final thoughts from Setrag or Chuck before we wrap the show. If there isn't, no problem. We could wrap it up. And then also, let me just check the live chat to make sure we're not missing anything there. It looks like we're okay. But any final thoughts from anything that we discussed today?
I guess the thought I would like to leave the audience with is technologies powerful like blockchain, artificial intelligence. Those are relatively sophisticated technologies, and they are powerful enabler. But really the biggest challenge I've seen, especially in innovation, is the cultural shift that is extremely important. That you know, we encourage within startups, within organizations, this culture of entrepreneurship, which is going to be very, very much this speed. In fact, I spend a lot of time on this whole notion of the enterprise in motion, the speed by which we innovate and leverage this technology. That's the thought I want to leave people with, that it's extremely important to realize true best practices, this speed of innovation, this accelerated speed of innovation.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, certainly innovation for companies is extremely important, and companies need to make sure they're continuing to innovate all the time. I mean, look at Toys R Us, for example. That was a company that was around for 75 years. They refused to adopt technology and really do what they needed to do, and now they're bankrupt and out of business. Every company needs to be able to do that. With gig economy and the changes with disruptive technologies that are coming out there, those startups are going to surpass enterprises in certain places because enterprises are not able to innovate and adapt and overcome as quickly as some of the startups do. So the pandemic that's happened right now has certainly slowed down R&D and innovation within companies, but they have to remember that the innovation engine of their company is what's going to drive them to be successful in the future. So keep innovating, keep doing, and keep making things happen in the future.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that more, especially the cloud point you meant about I always have this debate about working at home, or at least having the flexibility to. With these different technologies, you're able to do that so that when a pandemic or something happens, to your point, Chuck, you're able to quickly, be able to move this workforce home. And then to your point about Toys R Us, we're seeing that with J. Crew too. I posted an article about them filing for bankruptcy. I think many of the other retailers, JCPenney, Macy's, Nordstrom's, all of them are going to be in a world of hurt if they don't adopt innovation into their, and making more of a digital retail store with maybe some retail presence. But to both of your points, I think innovation is extremely important. I think the message that came out really clear here is innovation is important, and you can use these technologies to enable that innovation, but it's important to speak about what kind of business value or business model is associated with those technologies in order to help you be prepared for the future. So I want to thank Dr. Setrag Khoshafian for joining. I want to thank Chuck. I want to thank Rosa, Gabe, and Dana for setting all this up. And then, like I said, make sure to subscribe to the channel to get other updates. We do this live show every Thursday at noon Eastern time. And thanks everyone for joining. Thanks, guys.
Sean. Great job. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you, Chuck.